Morgan and I am the Director of Project at Play Scotland, the national organisation for play. Today our Chief Executive Officer, Marguerite Hunter-Blair, speaks to Dr. Sarah Goldsmith. Sarah's research focused on the relationship between gender, toys and play. At heart, Sarah is a playworker with a wealth of experience in supporting children's play experiences in a wide variety of settings, including Glastonbury. I hope you enjoy their conversation.
I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Sarah Goldsmith to Play Scotland's podcast series. We're absolutely delighted to be talking to Sarah today about her journey to Playwork and beyond. Sarah is currently a childhood practice lecturer at West College in Scotland and also works for Thrive Outdoors. And we're going to have a good chat about that. But first of all, we'd like to start with how Sarah found her way to Playwork in the first place. What made you choose Playwork as a professional career, Sarah?
Well, it was something that I fell into, as lots of playworkers do. I'd been working with children for a little while. I'd worked in running holiday clubs in a leisure centre, and I'd been an au pair in America, but I didn't really have any qualifications working with children, and I really enjoyed doing it. So I went to the careers office to see what sort of qualifications I could do, and in there you could do a degree in Playwork, which I didn't know anything about, but I thought that sounded fun and that was something that I wanted to do, I was interested in. So I ended up going to Leeds, Leeds Beckett now, was Leeds Met, and did the degree in Playwork. Fraser Brown was one of my lecturers, and it was great. I found out so many things about Playwork, and it totally matched with what I did in practice. And as part of that, I did an experiential learning session as part of the course with Maynell Games. And I ended up working for him for 10 years as a Playwork trainer and also running the after school and holiday club. And we also did things like we go to Glastonbury every year and work in the kids field, which I never knew there was a kids field in Glastonbury, but there is. So we did some stuff there. So I've been a playworker for a long time, but then in England, all the funding for play was taken away. So there wasn't as much work. So I ended up working for a carers centre, and I supported young carers and young adult carers in their respite care. So we did clubs and activities for them and holidays and stuff. So they had a time to play. And whilst I was doing that, I also did a Master's in Childhood Studies at the University of Sussex in Brighton. And from that, I saw advertise a PhD at Glasgow Caledonian University called Girls' Toys and Boys' Toys Learning Through Play. And I applied for that. Wasn't expecting to get it, and I did. So that meant I came up to Scotland, which is great because there's so much more play and everyone understands it much better up here. So then I did my PhD and did lots of other stuff in Scotland around playing. So it's great.
Yeah, I feel I've known you a long time, Sarah. And if anyone asked me, what do you know about Sarah Goldsmith, I would call you a playworker at heart. You sound one of the most qualified professional playworkers I've actually ever met. But it's amazing to hear that you're really rooted in a sense of fun and joy and play with children and young people of all ages. And talking about that care experienced youngsters that you work with, it's so important that people don't think of Playwork as a qualification of working with children in early years or in primary, that actually it really applies to children across the full age range.
Definitely.
There's so many things that big rabbit holes here that we could dive into, but I'd love to ask, when you mentioned Glastonbury, that's obviously what everyone would like to talk about, but we might park that just now and talk about your findings of your PhD. It sounds so interesting that, and now that we have a lot of understanding about place and the importance of place and how girls in particular use place differently in spaces and play differently in the public realm, could you share with us some of the key findings about the PhD?
Of course, yeah. So I rooted it in Playwork. Obviously, that's my background. So I wanted to do it from a child's perspective. And lots of research around toys has been done with children in the early years, which is great. We've learned lots of information and it's helped us to understand gender and how children kind of understand gender and what they do. So because of my background, I wanted to look at older children. I wanted to find out why children played with toys. We quite often know that, there's lots of boys' toys and girls' toys and that children tend to play in those specific areas or play with those specific toys. But asking children about why they are playing in the way they are or playing with the toys they are, I thought would give us much more information to help us understand those kind of things. So I did focus groups with children and I did individual interviews, and I did a card sorting activity that asked them to, so for individuals, I asked them what toys they like to play with. They might like to play with all of them, but why would they like to play with those? And they kind of put them in different categories of toys they'd like to play with and toys they wouldn't. And it was very gendered. I didn't ask anything about gender. I was just asking about the toys, and then we had a discussion about why they played with those toys or they didn't like them. And so obviously things like colour came up, and a lot of the boys automatically, if anything was pink, went into the don't like pile. So there was lots of that. It was very interesting to see, and that kind of reinforced findings that had come before. But it was interesting to talk to the children about why they had those kind of ideas. And a lot of that came from what they were and weren't allowed to play with, what they thought their peers wouldn't let them play with. So a lot of them, some of the boys did play with, so I had Lego. And we had Lego City, which was a police station. It was blue. And then we had the Lego Friends. There are obviously two different types aimed at, well, the girls' version is aimed at girls. And some of the boys said that wasn't real Lego because it had different characters and the pink and everything. So there was lots of information about that. And it was very interesting how those categories created difference between children, between boys and girls, and stopped them from playing with those other things. So it's coming from the toys. But also some of the boys said they didn't mind playing with the girls' Lego and the pink and stuff like that. So we can see that that's kind of changing a bit. And that was some of the older boys were saying that. And the girls will play with any Lego. So there's lots of different things that we can pull out of that and think about how toys are directing children to play in certain ways. So from what I wanted to do, from that finding, I wanted to see how that could help practitioners in practice, because it's great knowing all of this information, but what can we do? So I tried to create a framework to help practitioners to see the different influences, because it wasn't just toys. When I spoke to the children, they talked about football, and the girls said the boys won't let us play even if we're having to play with them. And that's partly because they don't know how to play, so they weren't as good. They wanted to learn. So because they didn't have that, they're not grown up with football and knowing the rules and all of that, or learning the skills, they weren't as proficient, so the boys didn't want them on their team. And even if they were playing at school or whatever, the boys wouldn't pass to them. So they were there, but they weren't involved. And some of the girls were quite little feminists. They were coming through and saying what they wanted to happen and why they wanted it to happen. They wanted to be part of this. So this framework that I've come up with is based on Goffman's dramaturgical analysis, and it's focused on the stage. So it's looking at the backdrops, because we're all born into a gendered world. So the backdrop is gender, and that's there all the time. But there's certain things that expose that backdrop that make gender more obvious or prevent you from doing things because of your gender. And there's other things that maybe conceal it or prevent it from being seen. So as practitioners, we want to think about the resources that we've got out. So does that enhance the gender backdrop? Does it create difference, or does it minimize that gender backdrop? So, if we're outside playing, there's a lot less gender influences than there are inside. So that gender backdrop goes much more into the distance, and there's other things that come to the fore that we're able to use, which breaks down those gender barriers. But things like how we respond to children, we have gendered expectations, we have unconscious gender biases. So we might respond to children playing in a gendered way and not even think about it or know about it. So we need to be reflective of our own gender biases and think about the language that we're using, how we're responding to children playing, and whether that is in a gendered way or not.
interesting. You know, I'm just thinking as well, so useful for parents to know about. As quite a new grandparent, someone was cleaning out the garage and they gave me a tool set, like a little Tykes tool set.
Brilliant.
So when my grandchild was a daughter, it didn't matter. It was the only thing really we had a few things left from our own children, but this tool set, and she's played with it from the get-go. But if I'd been going out to buy something, I don't think I would have bought it. Do you know, it was just...
Yes.
So I think if we understood these things more, we might pay more attention to what we might be buying for presents.
Definitely, yeah. And I think toys for younger children are much more gendered than they are for older children. So that creates even more difference when children are young. But yeah, I think it's definitely about thinking about children play with anything and everything. And we are making, it's adults that are putting those gender constrictions on toys and how we play with them. So it's about us and how we are either complicit in that or not. So it's thinking about what we're buying, why we're buying it, and then also our reactions and our expectations of how children play.
I think we'd like to move on to see what you're doing now. You're still involved in Playwork, and it's so nice to hear that you're lecturing as well and passing on the knowledge and experience and skills you've got. But you're also doing some work now with Thrive Outdoors. So would you like to tell us a wee bit about what you're doing in Glasgow?
Yeah, so I'm working on a project for all-age childcare, and it's through Glasgow City Council, and we're looking at what access children have to playing, well, not necessarily playing, to being outside, and how that could maybe be part of the all-age childcare provision. So we're looking at we're only working in 5 areas in Glasgow, and we're thinking about, we're working with organisations and families to find out what's already there, what children do outside, because it might not be playing, it might be sports. It could be just walking between places, could be playing outside shops or in the parks. So it's mainly about how we're trying to get away from the childcare aspects to think about being outside as children as a broader thing. Because it might be that children are playing in the street. Children still do that, maybe not as much as they used to. So we're looking at what's happening, but also what's preventing children from being outside. So whether, and we're talking to children and we're talking to adults. So it could be parents' fears, parents and carers' fears, whether real or imagined. That's still a barrier for children going outside. The weather has come up as quite a big barrier, but also things like not having spaces to go, and also things like dogs being off leads. There's been lots of dog attacks in the media recently. So there's kind of a real and an imagined fear that something might happen. So, you know, and we tend to create spaces where dogs can go, or there's more free spaces where dogs can go, whereas we pen children into a park that's quite limited. So should we be rethinking that? You know, things like glass being in playgrounds, that's obviously a barrier. So there's lots of things that are maybe stopping children from going outside, and a lot of these things we know about already, but it's good to hear it from the children and the families' perspectives as well, and then see how we can work around that to encourage more children outside. I think another thing that's come through is that parents don't necessarily know what to do when they are outside. So having some more information and ideas for parents and families and children to do when they're outside might be quite a useful thing that we might be looking into. But also working with organisations that are already doing things, because there's lots of great organisations who are already doing stuff.
I mean, there's great examples in Glasgow. I'm thinking immediately of Children's Wood. We've recently been working with Edith Curry on a chapter for John McKendrick's latest book that he's editing, and it was actually fantastic to hear the work that's been happening in Glasgow to do with place efficiency assessments in 18 of the schools.
Brilliant.
Such a rich seam of information now about everything that you've just been talking about, and which has actually led to some co-production and co-design of vacant and derelict sites.
Brilliant.
So I do feel that there's a lot of really good work going on in Scotland, and you kind of reflect that earlier on. But I think going back to Playwork, it's such an essential career, but I feel sometimes it is the poor relation. I'm wondering what you would say to young people today who are looking through the prospectuses and wondering what career path to take, what would you say to encourage them to go down a Playwork path? What are the benefits of a Playwork career?
I found that playworkers don't really have an agenda. We want to support and facilitate children to be able to play. We're not there to encourage children to learn. We know that's a byproduct of play. We know that children learn as they play, but they don't learn to play. So I think it's about having that, looking at things the other way around. We're probably the only profession that looks solely at play and the benefits of that and trying to support it. So I think if play is something that you're really passionate about and you want to encourage, it's a great profession to learn about that. And I think you also need to be able to step back from the play, because this is not about us. We've done our playing. This is about supporting children's play. So it's being able to have that confidence to be able to step back and observe what children are doing, and just kind of enable them to play the way they want to. And sometimes that might be a bit uncomfortable because it might be stuff that we are not maybe confident with or happy with, but it's about working with those children to facilitate them to do that in a way that's safe and supportive. And by safe, I mean that they can still take risks, that they're still able to judge those sorts of things. So we're not taking away all the risk and the adventure and the challenge for children. We're being able to support that. So I think it's a great opportunity to do things a little bit differently. The children that I worked with have been fabulous, and they love it. It's just being able to support them, and I love being able to see them enjoy themselves and do things for the first time and see that wonder through their eyes of experimenting and discovering different things. And it just gives them a freedom that maybe they don't have if we go in with an agenda for learning or sport or whatever it is. It just gives that freedom that it is child-led. It's what they want to do. It's not what I want them to do, because that's very different. And I just think it's a great career to go into. So I would encourage anyone.
They sold it really well. And I think it is grounded in, as you say, children's natural curiosity, creativity, which the more formal structures and systems in societies and communities seem to start to restrict from very early days. It's
definitely about giving children time, space and permission to play, which is in a decline. We adults want to control everything. Children need that time, space and permission to play, and we're guests in their play. In an ideal world, I wouldn't have a job, and that would be the best thing I could ever do, because play is what children do and they're the experts in it. But because we're restricting that, it's harder for them to do.
And one of the things that I think we all struggle with as well is the word play. Children, I would say 8 and upwards, and having been involved recently in the refresh of the play strategy, I don't think we've come up with a better word. I mean, in your experience, is there, what do children and young people over 8 call play? I mean, to say hanging out sounds almost like something antisocial, so we don't like to use the word hanging out anymore.
Yeah.
Obviously, what Article 15 gives them a right to
yes.
do. What other words do you think they use for play?
It is hanging out. It's being with their friends. It's socialising, doing activities, and they may talk about play, but it's a slightly different meaning, isn't it? It's not about, I don't know, playing with a teddy or a superhero and imagining, all the imagination games. I think it's much more cooperative and social, and there's much more discussions around what they're doing. I don't know what they would call it, actually.
The other thing we've noticed from children 8 and upwards is the engagement with phones, whether it's to arrange to meet up, to play or get involved in things, or whether it's communication led. But it definitely seems to feature now. It's from children 8 and upwards. I don't know if you've noticed a particular impact in that. I know we could have a whole separate podcast about digital.
Yes.
which we're not going to do, but it's just the influence of the phone as maybe a positive influence, if there is such a thing. I don't want to get controversial about it, but it allows them to find out where their friends are going, how to meet up with them. They might go together rather than, somewhere the parents might allow, as we would have done, is gone with other people in the street to play, to go and play somewhere. It might allow young people to find out where everyone else is going or where they are and go and catch up with them. So I don't know if you see any influence of that in the work that you've been doing.
Yeah, I think it's important for children to be able to communicate and find out where they're going, because, we used to phone everybody and, sort that out. So having that device in the pocket to be able to then link up with friends is much, much better for children and, enables that to happen a lot better. I think Chris Martin's just done his PhD looking at phone use in adventure playgrounds. And so he's looked at a lot of how children are using phones. And sometimes they're using them, they might be sharing a game or something that's online, but other times they're putting them in their pocket or their bag, and they are playing, they are socializing, they are doing things together. So it's become part of play, I think. And maybe as adults, we're so rightly worried about the negative things that are happening online and with phones, that maybe we don't see those positives that are coming through about how they are keeping children and young people in contact. They are able to share different things online or show people it's a different way of playing to how I did. We didn't have that device. So I think we need to think about how technology and phones in particular are becoming part of play, and how that's kind of being molded into play. Be a nice research project for someone.
I suspect there's probably lots going on already.
Yes.
So early on we parked Glastonbury, but let's go back to that and tell us some of the highlights of what happened there. It just sounds a fantastic bringing together, because I think when young people go to Glastonbury, they're definitely going there to play and have fun. That's what I take from it, and my own young ones that have been. But what happens on the children's play sites there? Who goes? What do they do? And is it something you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to be interested in children's play, then head along to the kids' field and see what's going on. It's quite a big field. It's kind of a contained one, and there's different tents in there, and they have different activities and things on during the day, so you can plan it like you do with the going to see the bands. There's different things on, so they might have magicians, they might have arts and crafts stuff. They've had a play bus in when I've been before, so there's lots of different activities and play opportunities for the children to do whilst they're there. And some parents come along, and sometimes they just drop the children at the field if they're older, and they just spend the whole day there whilst the parents are off going to see whatever bands they want to do. So it is a nice space for the children to be in, and enables them to play and have some fun. So with Maynard Games, we had big inflatable rings and balls and stuff like that. And the children played on them, and they'd move them around and jump off them and stand on them, and we'd play games. But usually it's about the children using those as resources to create their own games and their own play. Some of them would just lay on them, and just the other people would be jumping around on them, and they'd be bouncing. Sometimes it can get a bit manic, especially if we have some older children. They might be playing some big games, but then other times it's very chilled and very quiet. Just depends on who comes along and what they want to do. It's a lovely space for the children to come into, and there's lots of different things going on depending on what they want to do. So, and it totally, I didn't realise there was a kids' field at Glastonbury until I went along and worked there.
It sounds such a rich play experience, and it just fits so nicely alongside high quality music, high quality play. And I think the best thing about what you're talking about there was the fact of all the different age ranges playing together. I always think about, when you go into the workspace, you don't go and play, you don't go and work in your age range. You have to learn how to work with people of all ages and stages of their development. So I love that fact that there's an opportunity there for all ages to come together. So Sarah, I know that you're a member of Playwork Scotland, the Playwork Education Training Council in Scotland, and we are part of the UK consortium that is looking at the review of the National Occupational Standards for Playwork. Can you tell us why you think this is really important in Scotland today?
Yeah, I think it's something that needs to be done because the old ones are quite old now. So it's good to have a refresh because things are changing. But also, I think it brings to the fore the importance of Playwork and that the qualifications are based on the Playwork National Occupational Standards. So all the Playwork qualifications will go back to that. And I think we don't necessarily have a separate qualification now in Scotland for Playwork, but it's kind of part, we can do units to do that. So I think it's really important to have a Playwork strand or a Playwork qualification because we tend to get forgotten. And yeah, it's really important that we have early years practitioners who know what they're doing and can work in early years. But Playwork's really different to that. And I think there needs to be a recognition of that and how important it is because play is often used as a means for education, for therapy, for sport, for lots of other things. But we forget that play is really important for its own sake. And playworkers are the only kind of profession that look at play for its own sake. So I think it's so important that we have those occupational standards and the qualifications and the units are mapped to that to be able to help practitioners be able to do their job and their role in supporting and facilitating children's really chosen play.
I mean, I completely agree. And the moment, as you say, the National Occupational Standards for Playwork in Scotland have modules from other qualifications at the moment. And it'd be really important, I think, this time around to make sure that we don't need that aspect of it. I think for across the UK, it's all very different as to how the National Occupational Standards are applied. But in Scotland, as you know, the Playwork NOS becomes a qualification. It's even more important in Scotland, as always with these things. We are slightly different. And I'm delighted that people of your calibre and others have stepped forward to be part of this process because it's essential that we get it right. But people like yourselves with this lived personal experience from the very beginning of your career right through to what you're doing now, to be able to add value to the current process is absolutely fantastic. So thank you for your time on that just now and the time you're probably going to have to devote to it over the next 12 months.
You're welcome. It's important.
It is. It's really important. Just before we finish, Sarah, can I just ask you, what is your own favourite play memory?
Oh, I remember in our front garden, my mum and dad were building an extension and we had a massive pile of builder's sand, which is bright yellow, or was in those times. And my two cousins and my brother and I spent the whole summer in that sand building a habitat, a town. And we had tunnels and roads and cars and everything that we used that was our play space for the whole summer. And by the end of the summer, the sand was being taken away to use. And we were very upset because our space was being eroded. But it was great fun. We came home, we were yellow after each day. So yeah, it was great fun.
Sounds lovely. And if there wasn't enough sunshine, at least you had some yellow colouring.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Sarah Goldsmith, for being part of the Play Scotland podcast series today. It's been a complete joy and pleasure listening to your interest in play, leading to your career in Playwork and what you're doing today in Glasgow and across Scotland. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on your preferred app. To find out more about Play Scotland, please follow us on X @Play Scotland and visit our website at playscotland.org.